Hello and welcome to Connected with Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments, and business trends shaping the global economy. I'm Laura Atkinson-Hope, Public Service Counsel and Director of Global Pro Bono at Latham. I oversee and manage the firm's Pro Bono program, and I'm joined today by Latham partner Michèle Penzer and her Pro Bono client Shabir Kabiri.
Thanks, Laura. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Laura. Happy to be with you and Michèle today.
In addition to managing a busy commercial practice in the finance department and serving as global chair of the firm's recruiting committee, Michèle makes considerable time for pro bono, including leading the team that secured asylum for Shabir and his family. In this episode, we're going to hear about Shabir's harrowing journey from Afghanistan to safety in the US and the work our firm did to help him and his family. Shabir, I'd love to start with you. Could you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, Laura. Hi, Michèle. It's great to be doing this with you all. Yes, I was born in Pakistan because my parents had moved to Pakistan, immigrated there during the Afghan Civil War. And the reason my dad had to move was in the 80s, the Mujahideen and other extremist guerrilla groups were fighting the current government, and they wanted to force all the males to join them in the fight. My dad was against the violence from that time, and he moved there, so where he met my mom, and I was born there. I spent early years of my childhood there. Then in 2001, when the Taliban government of the time was toppled, my family and I moved back to Afghanistan. And then we started a new chapter in the country.
I imagine at that time it looked like things were turning around for you in Afghanistan. So can you tell us a bit about what it was like for you when you returned?
There was a lot of hope for everyone. Obviously, while it was safe in Pakistan, there were challenges. We didn't have any legal framework or legal paperwork to stay in Pakistan. For example, my family couldn't have open bank account. We couldn't own property. And we just went to private school, which we couldn't have used that years of school later on. So there was a lot of hope, obviously, with ours and all the other Afghans, millions of them who were living in Pakistan at the time, that we were going to our own country back and it will be all great, which it was good in the first couple of years. But unfortunately, things started to getting worse in 2006, and from there we are witnessing that a conflict started again and eventually led to what happened in 2021.
Right. So can you tell me just a bit about how you found your way to West Point and coming to the US after your time in Afghanistan?
Sure. So a quick story. My dad went to Kabul University back in the old days of Afghanistan, where there was relatively peace. He studied agriculture there, though he couldn't finish his studies because my grandfather, who was in the army, Afghan army of the time, he was killed while he was on his way to duty. Then my dad, well, that is the story. Then my dad had to leave his studies and go to Pakistan. But my dad had interaction with the American professors at Kabul University. So he had this idea of the Western world and education, advancement, and human values and democracy. Then I grew up hearing all these stories from him, how I believe they had professors from Nebraska University and bringing all their technical knowledge in agriculture with them to Afghanistan. So it was something in my mind. And given my grandfather that he was in the Afghan army, that led me to join the National Military Academy of Afghanistan. And when I joined there, I learned about West Point. This was totally out of luck. I did not know where West Point was, what it was. And that year that I joined, there was a scholarship. And our whole class, which was about 600 students, cadets, applied. Two of us got selected, and I was one of the two Afghan cadets who got accepted to West Point. And this was 2012 that I left Afghanistan and came to US for 4 years of school at West Point.
That's incredible. Can you tell us a bit about how that felt and what it was like when you eventually arrived in the US?
Absolutely. It was very exciting for me because I have always dreamed of going abroad to study. Growing up in Afghanistan, uh, I was aware of the lack of things that we have. For example, our school curriculum was sadly outdated by decades. And so it was a curiosity in me that I need to go out and see what the world outside is. So this was my opportunity to go and not to any other place but the United States. And then West Point, when I got accepted, I started watching videos, started learning about it, and started learning about its history. So it was really exciting for me to come in. When I came to West Point and spent 4 years, it was an amazing experience. It was so great to live, study, or train and work with some of the best young boys and girls of the U.S. students. And although this had a challenging part in it as well. From day one, when I landed at West Point, I felt that I'm representing Afghanistan there because I was wearing the American uniform, but on my right shoulder, I had the Afghan flag. So it felt a lot of pressure to do better, to represent my country the best. And also, I was aware that there were so many American military personnel were deployed in Afghanistan, especially from the army. So I would talk to anyone who I could tell them about Afghanistan, especially with my classmates, because I knew that someday they will be deployed to Afghanistan. So I would talk to them about the culture, about things that they could expect. Overall, it was an amazing experience, and I'm very grateful for it.
So you were there, was it 4 years, and then looking forward to taking what you'd learned back to Afghanistan? Is that right?
That is correct. I spent there 4 years. In 2016, I returned back to Afghanistan with a lot of hope, hoping that I will bring all this knowledge and expertise. So I studied electrical engineering at West Point with a focus on telecommunications because I felt that that is something the Afghan army needs the most, expertise in communication systems. So different army units could talk to each other and run their operations smoothly. Unfortunately, when I came back, the paperwork didn't work out, and I was not able to commission as an active duty officer. However, I was on reserves, and also this was the time when. So this was 2016. In 2014, the U.S. government had ended the combat mission, and going forward, the international forces were only doing training and support, and that led to the security situation getting really worse. When I returned back, I found the country in much worse situation than I had left, and but that still it was something that we had to preserve, and my family and I made sure that we are looking for each other, and I was still committed to helping Afghanistan. If I couldn't do it in the military way, I joined one of the telecom companies in Afghanistan. So I was a radio frequency engineer. Given my passion for telecommunication and electrical engineering, I wanted to make sure that everyone has access to internet in Afghanistan because I knew education and knowledge is something that may help us from this situation. I did that for 2 years, and then I applied for U.S. Fulbright scholarship, and luckily I got selected. So in 2018, I came back to the U.S. for my master's degree. I completed 2 years of graduate school, and in 2020, right when COVID started, thankfully I had finished my studies. So I went back to Afghanistan, and then I started working for the World Bank as a digital development consultant. And this time I was so blessed to be in a position where I could work on national projects. We were trying to bring internet to the most remote areas of Afghanistan, connect the schools there, connect the offices. And we had a lot of big goals and big projects lined up for Afghanistan in 2020. But unfortunately, the events in 2021 resulted in all those projects to stop for the time.
During that time, I think you've noted for us in our conversations that you saw the Taliban rising to power, and you, as a person, had felt that you'd been changed by your experiences in the US, being abroad. Tell us a little bit about how that, made you feel operating, trying to live in Afghanistan at that time.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely felt it. And the problem was not only it was a problem for me, for my security, but also for my family, my five younger siblings and my parents. So me going to the US, studying at West Point and coming back with different set of ideas, which was totally opposite to where we lived, the people who lived in our area. They held very conservative ideas that wouldn't align with modern way of thinking, of believing in human rights and believing in education for women, in women working outside. So in my family, my sisters were the first female from my side of the family, generational, who went to school, who completed high school, and then went to a college. This was in my family unprecedented. But given my father's commitment and my mother, who always valued education, and then I went to West Point and came back. And again, during all this time, I returned back not only as a West Point graduate, then also as a Fulbright scholar. And I felt that I was so blessed to have this opportunity. So I need to make sure every step of the way I can contribute back. So I was quite active within we had an Afghan Fulbright committee. I was active there. I would talk with a lot of young students who are looking to go out to study. So all those activities, and given the situation that was happening in 2020, made it very risky. But still, there was hope for peace as events were leading to 2021. And that's why I stayed there. And we were hoping that there will be a peaceful outcome, which unfortunately that didn't happen.
And ultimately, that culminated in your evacuation to the US. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I will never forget because all this time you think sometimes you watch movies and you think like, it feels a little exaggerated. But when I lived through those days, nowadays I'm like, there's no exaggeration. That makes sense. The movies make sense because it was like a movie. That day, August 2021, I was working remote. Due to COVID, the World Bank offices were closed. So it was just another day working from home on my project. And then we realized that the Taliban are entering the city, and then the president has left the country. A total chaos. Right up till that time, I was talking with my friends, with my West Point classmates about different ways to leave the country, but we didn't know it will happen so sudden. So we were sitting in our home, in our apartment, not knowing what to do. But I get this call from my classmate. It is my roommate, Caleb McDaniel, my best friend from West Point, Kunal Jha. And they tell me that you have 10 minutes to pack everything and go to the airport. And I'm spent a couple seconds like, what are you telling me? Because right now there's a total anarchy in the city. Nobody knows what's happening. How would I make this journey from my home to the airport with my family? And my sister-in-law was pregnant at the time. But I feel like all those training, and I do have to say that West Point training pays back later on, although we complain so much that it's so hard. But it kicked right in, and I said, okay, it's just a mission. That's the objective. So I went to the other room and told my family. And that was this happened so fast, but in my mind, I was like, this is a test for my family. Will we pull this off? Because we could just say like, no, we're not leaving. We're just safe right now in this apartment. We're going to wait for it. But to my surprise, they trusted me and I trusted my classmates. We didn't know how is this going to work out. Just show up at the airport. Who will meet us there? How it's going to work out. But I trusted my classmates that they will figure out something. And within 20 minutes, we packed things, left the apartment. Then it didn't work out. We spent another 2 days and nights around the airport. eventually coming back to our apartment. And then on a third day, we went back to the airport. This is those scenes that you all have watched on the TV, the big crowd around the airport. And it is just a struggle to move 1 inch. We literally had to move inch by inch. And I still remember I was on WhatsApp with my English teacher, Barrett Ward. He's telling me like, how are you all doing? I tell him like, we only move 1 inch. He told me something that always stays with my mind, which he said, slow is a smooth is fast. I said, okay, slow is a smooth is fast. So we kept saying that until we made it to that small fence gate. So on the other side of the fence, we had an American officer come, a great person, a hero to me and my family. He was able to open the gate and vouch for me and my family to the Marines who were holding the door and to the U.S. Embassy consular officer who wouldn't let anyone unless they're sure that they have the proper document and American passport or other documents. But he vouched for us that I'm from West Point, this is my family, and that's how we entered the airport. And from there, this is very interesting, I would like to share. It was just a very small, couple inches wide, thick, a metal fence door. In this moment we crossed that line, I was instantly relieved. Prior to this, I felt like the whole weight of the world is on my shoulder, the security of myself and my family. But just crossing that line, knowing that I've lived in the US, knowing how the US military operates, when you enter the security perimeter, I was totally relieved because I knew once I entered there, I am under protection. If anything will happen to me, people will make sure that I will go through due process. I mean, I will have my rights. My rights will be honored to me. Where outside of the fence, I didn't know what would happen to me in the next minute. So that was really remarkable, and that is something that will stay in our mind. And one last thing to share to the audience. So all this time I was wearing my West Point ring. And like every school, I have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure West Point was one of the, if not the first, but one of the first schools that came with the class rings. So all this time I was wearing my West Point ring, and that was also one of the clues for the officers on the gate to let me in. And once I crossed the gate, my younger siblings were looking at me like, your ring is powerful. What's going on with it? I said, sure, this is a West Point ring. It has a meaning. So that's why it led us through the gate.
Gosh, it's, hearing your story, it takes me back as well. Those of us who were watching the humanitarian crisis unfold. In most cases, we see legal needs that emerge sometime after a humanitarian crisis like this. But I think in the Afghan evacuation, those things coincided. We were dealing with individuals who had just extreme humanitarian needs for safety, protection, transport, at the same time as knowing that we needed to do legal work to help individuals leave their country and enter another country safely. And so, I'm going to transition now to Michèle and just talking a bit about what that initiative looked like for us. We have been involved in humanitarian immigration work for a very long time as a firm, and we were able to draw on the partnerships that we have with organizations like Human Rights First, the International Refugee Assistance Project, Casa Cornelia, others. And we involved 17 Latham officers in our effort to help Afghan clients who were being evacuated. So, Michèle, can you tell us a bit about what drew you to helping both in your immigration practice generally and Shabir's case in particular when this matter came to the firm?
So, yeah, happy to. So I've done a number of asylum cases over the years and have also done a number of cases where in a variety of different ways, Latham has helped Afghan nationals come to the United States, including on special immigrant visas and with Shabir's family seeking an affirmative grant of asylum. Shabir's case really resonated with me because he had been in the United States. He had been at West Point, at our military academy. He had been here studying on a Fulbright and, had really done so much to give back to his community. And it was very, very clear as soon as I heard about this case that he and his family simply would not be safe in Afghanistan. Given the transfer of power to the Taliban, once they took over, there would be no safety for them in Afghanistan. And so I was immediately drawn to the case as soon as I saw a call go out to ask for volunteers. I raised my hand, as did many, many other people at Latham, and we were able to staff a pretty large team of people in order to work on the entire family's applications all at once.
So can you tell us a bit about the legal work involved when putting together an asylum application for a family like Shabir's?
Yeah, well, so we have multiple teams involved because we were doing all of these applications at once, and we had a relatively limited amount of time to do it. When we came into the case, it was April of 2022. The family had left Afghanistan and arrived in the United States. The prior August, there's a 1-year application period in order to file. And so we really only had a matter of months in order to get all of the paperwork together. There is a tremendous amount of paperwork, not only filling out forms, but also writing briefs, helping the family and others write affidavits that are going to tell the story that will hopefully convince the immigration authorities here in this country that they should be granted asylum.
So, Michèle, you've been deeply involved with Shabir's case since this matter first came to Latham. And can you talk us through the legal aspects of the work that we needed to do for him?
Yeah, so among other things, we put together a brief explaining all of the different grounds that Shabir had in order to claim asylum. And we also worked with Shabir and others on their affidavits, which would enable Shabir to tell his story, right? In terms of the grounds for asylum, somebody needs to be a refugee and be unable or unwilling to return to their home country because of a history of past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution. In each of those cases, it has to be on account of certain protected grounds. It can't be because of anything. In Shabir's case, though, there were a whole host of protected grounds that we were able to speak to. For example, Shabir has a different interpretation of what it means to be Muslim. The Taliban requires everybody to practice, their religion in a certain way. And, Shabir's view is that actually there's a very different way that one can be a practicing Muslim and should be a practicing Muslim. So we were making an argument on the ground of religion. We were also making an argument on the ground of political opinion. As Shabir has discussed, he supports democracy. He supports education and human rights. He has condemned publicly the Taliban on social media and in other forums. And so there were a whole host of reasons that it was quite obvious and everybody knew that Shabir really did oppose the Taliban. Shabir is also an ethnic Tajik. Another ground for asylum is race or ethnicity, and that is a group that the Taliban has targeted repeatedly over the years. And then finally, you can also seek asylum because you fear persecution as a result of being a member of a particular social group. And in Shabir's case, he is a member of a variety of particular social groups that made him truly fear that he would be persecuted if he were to return to Afghanistan. For example, he is a member of a very small and very particular social group of people from Afghanistan who were cadets at West Point. It's a group of, I think, all of 4 or so people who did that. And again, it was very well known that Shabir was a cadet at West Point. He also served in the Afghan army. As mentioned, he was in the military academy in Afghanistan, came to West Point, returned to Afghanistan, was a reservist in the army. And as we all know, the Taliban obviously was targeting members of the Afghan military. Shabir also obviously, went to school in the United States, not only at West Point, but also as a Fulbright scholar. And the Taliban was actively targeting people who had studied abroad, particularly in Western countries, or who had worked for Western institutions in any way, shape, or form. And that's yet another group that Shabir is part of because he had worked with the World Bank and other institutions that were clearly deemed to be sort of Western institutions. And so for all of those reasons, we thought we had terrific grounds for Shabir to successfully apply for asylum.
Thank you, Michelle, for that great summary of all the grounds that I was meeting. Again, this shows how you all took time to go through this because I wasn't sure when I looked at the asylum application that which ground applies to me, but you and the team worked through it and we went through the whole story. We found out which grounds make sense and we put the application together.
And even though it was so compelling, so strong a case, there were still hurdles to overcome in putting it together somewhat counterintuitively. The fact that he had served in the military, the fact that he'd handled a weapon before, things like that can be problematic for asylum seekers if they have them in their history. So how did you plan for that and how did you address that in the case?
We knew that those things would come up. Those are the kinds of questions that people often get in an asylum interview, right? Have you handled weapons? Have you served in the foreign military? What have you done? That, basically, people they're looking for potential issues, right? Asylum officers are looking for potential issues. And so, we felt very confident that there were good explanations for all of this and worked with Shabir in advance to prepare him for the interview to make sure that he and all of his family members had a sense of the questions that may be asked. That said, it took longer for Shabir's case to finally be resolved than everybody else. And I will admit at some point, and we kept kind of following up to try to see, hey, what is it? Is there a holdup? Is there a reason? I think that ultimately there was no particular reason other than there was a vast number of cases that the government was trying to process. But I will admit, at one point, I was getting a little bit worried. Was there a reason that they had somehow singled out Shabir's case when, in fact, the rest of his family members had actually all been granted asylum already?
Yeah, that's right. So tell us a little bit about that. So we were helping Shabir's mom, his younger siblings, Amir, Aisha, Shahid, sister-in-law Mariam, and his adult sisters, Rabina and Hajra. How did we help in their cases? I'm sure each of them required a different approach, and each of them had to apply independently.
Yes, exactly. And so we really did put together separate applications for the various family members and groups. And the cases were all a little bit different, right? Shabir's case was unique for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. But, his mom, his sisters, et cetera, could not claim, for example, that they had studied at West Point or worked for for Western institutions, et cetera. And so every case was a little bit different. And we had different teams working on different cases. Obviously, we coordinated because fundamentally, much of the story is the same in the sense that, what they experienced in Afghanistan and the persecution that they feared from the Taliban, right, did come from the same roots. And so we did coordinate, but we wanted to make sure that every family member was telling his or her own story. And so we worked with each of them on their own affidavits. We also worked with other folks on supporting affidavits as well. So in Shabir's case, for example, we reached out to several people, including one of his former professors at West Point, a retired brigadier general. We reached out to his employer here in the United States. We reached out to a former West Point classmate of his. We reached out to several people who could themselves attest to what they knew about Shabir's story, what they knew about him, and what they knew about what he would face back in Afghanistan.
That's amazing. And so thanks to you and the team and all of your hard work, Shabir and his family were ultimately granted asylum. And Shabir, how did it feel when you found out that you and your family members could stay here and be safe in the US?
First of all, I would like to say that I cannot stress enough how grateful my family and I are for what Latham and Watkin and the team has done for us. And I couldn't have imagined this. When we first arrived here, it's incredible how much hard it is to start life from scratch. And then in the US, I hadn't even thought all of these small things, the paperwork, the driver's license for everyone at the home, the school for my younger siblings, the rent, the leases, the work, appointments, medical appointments. If I had to deal with legal work on top of that, I don't think I cannot imagine. So it was a huge help. And we literally became a family. As Michèle said, we had few months to prepare this and all that work. So I remember every other week we were on call, and the associate Latham Watkins associates are phenomenal. We had amazing time interacting with them, and them listen so patiently to our stories. It was amazing for myself and our family. So yeah, getting the news for asylum was totally so happy. Especially interesting story. The way I got it is even very interesting. So as Michèle said, I was the last person to get it, probably due to I was in the military. I had used the weapon systems and all these technicalities. So I've been wondering, like, what's going on? What's the delay? And the USCIS and State Department had these gatherings for Afghan refugees specifically. So there was one in Arlington, and I wasn't even sure that I would go there. I had to take leave from work. I was debating it. I said, "All right, let me go. I'll go there. They'll say it's in the process. I'll come back." So I go to the table to this lady from USCIS, and I give her my ID number, and she looks at me saying like, "We may have some news for you." I said, "What?" She said, yes, just wait. You can return in 30 minutes or an hour, I think. So, and she didn't say it, but she made sure that I understand it is a good news. So I left they were at the event. I went to the park, and I usually, when something good happens in life, I go for a walk. This happened for my West Point admission, for my Fulbright scholarship, for everything, just to process it because there's so much joy. So same thing, I went for a long walk and thinking everything. And when I returned back, they had all the paperwork printed, and they actually, so there's a I-94, a small card, like a postcard for asylees. They wrote it in front of me, stamped it, and handed over to me. And there was a big crowd of people, and the other USS officers, they all cheered and they took pictures. So it was incredible. Yeah.
Congratulations. It's awesome to hear how you, after all of this time, received that wonderful news that once again, your life was going to change. And Michèle, for you, can you share how this experience has impacted you working on this case?
Yeah, well, look, I was thrilled, obviously, when I heard. It was the best news I had heard, not only all day, all week, all month. I mean, it was just such fantastic news. And honestly, it sort of reaffirmed to me how important it is to do pro bono work, right? Look, I'm a finance lawyer. I love my practice. It's interesting. It's great stuff, et cetera. But doing this kind of pro bono work has such an impact on people's lives. And that's why I love doing it. That's why our firm does so much of it. And, so getting these great results, it's so reaffirming, right? It just really makes you even more excited to take on the next case.
Shabir and Michèle, honestly, I couldn't have said it any better. So thank you, Michèle, for your contributions to our pro bono program. And congratulations again, Shabir, on your asylum. Best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Michèle. It was great talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Shabir, for joining us today. It's been a true privilege to get to know you and your family.
And thank you to our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes coming soon. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcasts on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. If you'd like more information about the topics in this podcast, please email us using the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.